Welcome, this is Information Service Engineering, lecture number 1, Natural Language Processing. In this part of the lecture we will talk about morphology. And as you know, a word in a language might come in several disguises, and they influence the meaning of the word. And this, of course, is being taken care of in morphology. So what is morphology? Morphology is defined as being the study of internal structures or the formation of words, and how words can be modified and change, by that also their meaning. It's also the parsing of complex words into their components, which are called morphemes. So this is morphology, and this is the subject of this part of the lecture. So let's start with these so-called morphemes. Morphemes are the smallest grammatical unit in a language, which means the smallest meaningful unit in a language. And what we do is we define or we distinguish several kinds of morphemes. There are free morphemes and bound morphemes. And this you can see in two different kinds of words. There are simple words which consist of a single morpheme, like for example to work, to build, to run. And there are complex words which have an internal structure, which means these kind of words, there exist two or more morphemes. Like for example in worker, there we have the root work, and we have an affix er, which changes the root work, which might be a verb or also a noun, to the worker. So the meaning changes. We have here the core part, the root of a complex word, and this part usually carries is the major component of the word, and it carries also the majority of the meaning. On the other hand, you have here the affix. This is a so-called bound morpheme, and this part usually of a complex word does not belong to any lexical category. So this is not a verb, this is not a noun or an adjective, but nevertheless it changes often the meaning of exactly the root. So, as we said, we distinguish free morphemes, which are simple words which consist only of one morpheme. And we have bound morphemes, which means these are morphemes that have to be attached to another morpheme to receive any meaning. So for example, here we have the word unkindness, and here un and ness, these are bound morphemes that require the root, which here is kind, to receive any meaning. So we know now that un and ness, these are affixes, but to distinguish this further, if this affix comes in front of a root, then it's a prefix because it comes before. And if it comes after a root, then it's called a suffix. So we have prefixes and suffixes. And of course, there can be several suffixes in a row, as we can see when we build words in English language. On the other hand, if you have a complex word and you want somehow to find out what's the meaning of the word, what you do is you do a morphological parsing to find out what are the morphemes of which the word is composed of. And this can be visualized in a so-called morphological tree, which is a parse tree according to the morphology of a word. So here you see, for example, morphology. Morph can be a noun, could also be a verb. And then you put the affix ology on it, and then you form a new noun. So this then is the parse tree of, or the morphology tree of the word morphology itself. On the left side, you see a much longer word, anti-disestablishmentarianism, and you see then, of course, the parsing, the morphological parsing becomes much more complex. But in the end, you need to distinguish which is the part or which morphemes are constituting an entire word, because you see each single morpheme changes somehow the meaning of the word. So you have in the middle here somewhere establishmentarianism, and if you put the word anti in front of it or anti-dis, then of course it changes and changes again. So we will see a bit more about how these changes really are bound to so-called rules. So there are morphological rules which in the end determine how to build complex words out of morphemes. And these rules are usually three types of rules. You have the so-called derivation, which changes directly the meaning of a word. You have compounds where you put several morphemes together, and you have inflection, which is referred to I change somehow the outer shape of the word and put an affix, for example, to the word to change the time which the verb expresses, for example, or which changes other circumstances. So we will see how this really works. So derivation, compound, and inflection. We start with derivation. Derivation is the process of forming a new word from an existing word by adding affixes. And by that, of course, the meaning of the resulting word will become different from its root. And very often also, there is a change in word category involved. But this is not always the case, but in most of the cases. Very simple example for that, you see here the root teach, which is a verb. And by adding the affix er, you become teacher, which is the resulting word, and you see the category has changed. Now the verb has become a noun. And of course you can also visualize this again then on the left side as you see here, or sorry, the right side, as in a morphological tree. So, next thing after derivation is the compound. As I already told you, there I combine already existing words into new ones, and there is no affixation. But of course, each of the words that are part of the compound, they might contain or might be assigned to a certain word category. Let's look at a few examples. The first one here, we have two nouns. We have lawn and mower, and together it becomes the lawnmower. Or the second one, there we have a preposition and a noun. We have up and shot, and together it's upshot. And the next one, blow dry, becomes blow dry. Overgrown becomes overgrown. And you see here, putting together two specific categories, the words become a new category. So putting two nouns together, as in the sense of lawnmower, the resulting thing again is a noun. Putting a preposition and a noun together probably results into a noun. So by looking at that, can you make out any rule? It's quite easy. You just have to look at that. If you look at this long enough, you see that the second part here of the compound usually is called the head, and this one in English determines what will be the outcome of this compound and what will be the final class or category of the resulting compound. Okay, so this was the compound. And the third rule of morphology that we have is the inflection. And this is a modification of the word to express different grammatical categories. As we have already mentioned, tense or also case, voice, aspect, person, number, gender, or the mood. And in English language, this kind of inflection is predominantly expressed with the help of affixation. So in other languages, the word might change in another way, but in English, you put an affix in front or in the end of the word to make clear that this is an inflection. Okay, let's have a look at the inflection in English language. In English, there are only 8 inflectional affixes. So this is easy to remember. First of all, of course, to make something from singular to plural, there is the noun plural s. So simple example, he has 3 desserts. There is another s that can be put onto a noun, that's the noun possessive s. So for example here it's the genitives s. This is Betty's dessert. There I put behind an apostrophe an s to make clear that this dessert belongs to Betty. Then also if I add the affix s to a verb, this is used usually to express present tense for a verb. So Bill usually eats dessert. This means this s expresses present tense. For the past tense, I use for a verb the affix ed. So he baked the dessert yesterday. There ed expresses past tense. Then for the verb we have the past participle. He has always eaten dessert. This is an en, which is put as a suffix to a morpheme or to a verb. And then we have the present participle. He is eating the dessert now, for expressing that something or some action is going on right now. And then we have for adjectives the comparative, which means, for example, here we have his dessert is larger than mine. by affixing er to an adjective, this becomes a comparative. And if we have comparative, there is then also the next exaggeration, which is then the superlative. So for adjectives, we also have the possibility to express that there is nothing which is larger, bigger than the one we are describing just here. And this is then the superlative, which means, for example, her dessert is the largest, so there is no other dessert which might be or which can be larger than that one. So these are the 8 inflectional affixes that are used in the English language. Other languages have even more affixes to express much more things. So for example, in Turkish, I have been told there are lots of affixes and you can express much more than in English with the help of affixes. So compound was quite clear. We have 2 morphemes or 2 words and want to form a new word out of that. For the distinction of inflection and derivation, you should keep in mind that the derivation often changes the category of the base, while the inflection never does that. But derivation not always changes the category. We will see this in the examples later on. Then on the other hand, derivation changes the meaning of the base. Inflection doesn't change the meaning. And usually derivation applies before you apply inflection. Okay, let's have a look at a few examples. First one, the farmer's cows escaped. So you see here we have a derivation. So the farm has become a farmer by adding er, and we are talking about the cows of the farmer. So therefore also we use this noun possessive s. So we add the apostrophe s to make it clear that the cows belong to the farmer and they escaped. Cows has an s, which is the plural s for nouns, and escaped, of course, here the ed, which expresses the past tense. Look at the next one. It was raining. So there we have the verb rain, and by putting or adding the affix ing, we make out of it the present participle. Next one. Those socks are inexpensive. What do you think? Yeah, of course, the socks, plural s, and inexpensive. There you have to decide, is it inflection or derivation? So we have the word expense, and to make an adjective out of it, you put the suffix ive to it. Then it's expensive. And to change the meaning by adding the prefix in, you have inexpensive. So therefore, both of these affixes then form a derivation, not an inflection. Next one, Jim needs the newer copy. We have the verb need, we add an s, so this is an inflection. And then we have new, we make a comparative, er, then we have newer. So these are 2 inflections. Let's look at number 5. The strongest rower continued. Strong, strongest, this is the superlative, so this is definitely an inflection. But rower, of course, this was a verb, this is not a comparative er, this is a derivation from row, we create a rower. And then we have to continue and we make this past tense, then it's continued, so this is then an inflection. Next example, the pit bull has bitten the cyclist. Bad situation, but let's have a look. Where is inflection? Where is derivation? To bite, and then you have the past tense participle or perfect participle. You have made bitten out of it, and you have to cycle or the cycle, and you make the cyclist out of it. So this changes the meaning. Therefore, it's a derivation. Then number 7, she quickly closed the book. So we have quick, and we make an inflection. Is it an inflection? No, it's a derivation. So we have an adjective, and from this adjective we are creating an adverbial. And we have quick and then quickly. And close, simply for the verb close, we turn it into past tense, therefore it's inflection. And let's have a look at the last example. The alphabetization went well. Yeah, alphabetization. So what is that? 2 times derivation. We have the alphabet, then we make a verb out of it, alphabetize, and then we make a noun of it again, alphabetization. Yeah, you see, language might be complex, but by a first morphological analysis, you are able to learn much of the meaning of the words, whether it's a noun, whether it's a verb, or, exactly to know this already helps you in the correct interpretation, which means in the understanding of the information which is conveyed via the language. Last but not least, I also want to point out that, of course, the core of a word is often referred to as the so-called word stem, and the process to reduce a word to its core, this process is called stemming. So, for example, cats, to remove the affix, to come back with the word stem cat, this is referred to as stemming, and cat is the word stem of cats. But simply by cutting away the affixes not always leads you to a situation where you find that word, that is the result, also in the dictionary. In the dictionary there are so-called lemmas, or the words lemma. This is the dictionary form. So therefore, to transform a word into its dictionary form, into its lemma, this process is called lemmatization. For example, if you have the word better, so the core or the dictionary form of better is good, and better is the comparative form of that adjective. So keep in mind, stemming is something different than lemmatization, but we will see that we will need both also then for further language processing. Okay, so far so good. We are now already in the state that we can try first experiments in natural language processing, but before doing experiments, we have to deal with how to undergo these and evaluate these experiments. So evaluation is rather important here, and also we have to quantify the quality of the results we achieve in the evaluation. And there you will learn in the next part of the lecture about the notions of precision and recall.